Greetings, I'm Dazzling One. So much has happened since I last spoke with everyone last Wednesday. I didn't get a chance last week to comment and give my opinion on what I believe is going on with the Ebola virus. I also not only want to talk about Ebola today, but Enterovirus, the fourth beheading, and the national security breaches that have been happening in Washington, D.C. As you will know, I've been busy with midterms this week, but hopefully by next week I'll be ready to do another research video. I always say it, and I hope this time I can follow through. College is something that is very time-consuming, especially when you're going full-time. However, I usually try to make time to do research because not only am I teaching you guys or informing you guys, I'm also learning myself. I have a lot of topics that were suggested to me by you guys that I'd like to cover as well. Getting into the first topic of Ebola. Ebola is an interesting disease. I've heard many things about it, that it was discovered in 1976 by a young Belgian scientist traveling to the jungles of Congo in the month of September. That was 38 years ago. Two simultaneous outbreaks, one in Nazara, Sudan, and the other in Yambuku, Democratic Republic of Congo. The latter occurred in a village near the Ebola River, from which the disease takes its name. It's been around for a while, but it wasn't until this year in March that most people started talking about it, since it's claiming so many lives in West Africa. And Americans are concerned because of Eric Duncan, a Liberian man who came to the country on the 19th of September and didn't start to display symptoms until the 24th, which the evening of it was Rosh Hashanah. And then on the 26th, which is that very morning, because the way the holidays work on the Jewish calendar is sundown begins the holiday, like a Sabbath, and sunup ends it. And then on the 26th, he was taken to the hospital, but according to the news, they released him, and then on the 28th, he was taken back and put into isolation, and on the 30th, the diagnosis of Ebola was made, making it the first diagnosis outside of West Africa. Since then, all hell has broke loose, and fear-mongering has begun. I guess the first question I asked myself when following this Ebola outbreak was, did this disease just one day pop up out of nowhere, or was it designed? Because there are bioweapons out there. Here's the interesting thing from my point of view. I noticed I'd say between a 3 to 5 year pattern, mainly 4, when it comes to major outbreaks or scares. I remember, although I was only in the first grade, maybe second, because it was between the years of 2001, 2003, and say I began first grade in 2000, so maybe second grade. But I remember that year because people began going crazy about mad cow disease, and no one really wanted to eat beef because the stories about people who were eating it, they were going mad. And then about 4 years later, in the year 2000 and about the year 2005, there was the whole scare with H1N1 virus, bird flu, and people were going crazy over whether or not they should eat poultry, and they were talking about it claiming a lot of lives, especially in Asia, because I can remember by then I was in 6th grade, and we had those little Times magazines for kids, and they would make us read them, and I can remember the whole bird flu pictures on it, and people were in a commotion. And then I remember about another 4 years later, so going from about 2001 to 2005, we hit 2009, and we have the swine flu. And a lot of people were worried about consuming pork because people were getting very sick. And people were saying that different people had swine flu, and nobody could tell the difference between swine flu and other flu. And I can remember that year too, because I was a sophomore and I got sick in the fall, and I had a flu. I don't know what kind of flu it was, but it did feel different. Like my eyes burned. I had sensitivity to light, and all of that. And then I got a stomach flu in the spring, which wasn't swine flu, but I couldn't hold anything down, not even water. So I noticed this pattern, and I thought, because I was kind of following this, I started to say, wait a minute, mad cow disease, and then you can't eat beef, and then you have bird flu, you can't eat chicken, and then you have swine flu, you can't eat pork. And so then I'm like, well, maybe they're going to have a fish flu, or, some kind of flu that it's caused through sea creatures, or, things we consume, like, shrimp, and things like that. But it wasn't. And instead, we're here to the year 2014, about 4 years later, and we have Ebola. And the hysteria has begun with it, especially now that it's flu season. Here's the thing, I'm not saying Ebola doesn't exist, or that it may not be a concern, or that it's not overplayed. But to me, it's pretty coincidental, maybe too coincidental, that Ebola outbreak starts in the 4 to 5 year range when you consider mad cow disease, bird flu, swine flu, and now this. And usually these diseases, they start to become a bigger concern, especially because you have to consider bird flu and swine flu. They were big too, because a lot of people during flu season couldn't tell if it was really that. And then mad cow disease started in September. Ebola's, people start getting concerned about it in March. However, now that we have our first American diagnosis, the first diagnosis outside of West Africa, a lot of people are going crazy. Anybody who's coughing, wheezing, has any little symptoms, people are so scared that they could get sick, that some people are saying we should hold people for 21 days after they fly into the country, make sure they don't have it, and then let them go, and people want quarantine. Here's the thing, I think that in West Africa, that stopping it, there should be some sort of quarantine. But the thing about doing quarantine here is people will become very hysterical. A kid will be coughing, I'll be like, well, maybe they have Ebola. And you'll start putting sick people if people aren't sick. I've also heard that there's a patent for Ebola and that our government designed it. And I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case either, because in the past, diseases have been designed for the sole purpose of reducing a population. The other thing is, since Ebola has symptoms that take 8 to 9 days to manifest, people can walk undetected, and then later on people can end up getting sick because they came in contact with them. And of course, like I said earlier, the flu-like symptoms doesn't help. And the other thing is, it's a disease that basically attacks blood vessels, causes clotting until the person just bleeds out and dies, and every organ slowly dies until they're already dead, and then they die, and then their body liquefies. Just in case you didn't know exactly what it did. Speaking of sicknesses right now that are becoming a concern, the other one that I'm hearing a lot about, which coincidentally has another E name, is the Enterovirus affecting children. I've heard many are saying that this is caused by the illegal immigrants, the influx of kids that were sent to different states, because a lot of people said we didn't know where they went, and now suddenly the kids in this country are coming up sick. Could the two be linked? Maybe. It's sad though when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, because I told you guys I saw that a week ago, it tips you off about what exactly they have planned. They talked about how they had engineered a bioweapon and they were going to attack the masses with it, and they showed an example on a guy where they made him sick, and then they said, oh, after we kill a bunch of people and they're dying, then we're going to turn around and we're going to present a cure. And then, of course, it was a mutagen. So right then and there in a kids movie, they told you exactly what they want to do. And like the whole Georgia Guidestones thing in 2014, and we see in 2014 a lot of people are going crazy over this Ebola thing, whether Ebola is the real threat or it's the vaccine. The other thing is, like I said in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, is that like when the debris was falling, it broke the 2014. To me, that's a sign that they want to do something this year, but I'm not saying that they're going to be as successful as they want to be. Because there's a lot that they've tried to do in the past, and they still haven't succeeded as much as they'd like to, because the population is still at 7 billion right now. And of course, the strain, which is about a disease spreading that turns people into flesh-eating vampire zombies, which is delightful, right? Ended this past Sunday. At the end, they realized the master vampire couldn't be stopped by sunlight, and he got away. However, one of the characters met the ancient vampires, and it turns out there's a war between them. There are good ones and bad ones. Sounds like every story about the gods or supernatural beings. There's the ones, we might see them as monsters by the way they look, or there might be evil ones, but then there's always the protectors of us. Going back to the I, Frankenstein movie, the gargoyles were our protectors. They were keeping us safe. They were basically, to me, they reminded me of fallen angels. The demons were the bad guys. They were the ones trying to kill us, and they were constantly at war. You look at, like I said, on the strain, you got your good vampires and you got your bad vampires. And you look at all these stories, there's always the good ones and the bad ones. You know, it's always about, there's some other external force fighting for mankind that's not human, that's above our understanding, that's outside of our realm, that fights for us. And even if we would look at it and say this is extremely evil, no, it's fighting for us, so it's good. And that's pretty much what I got off the strain when they showed the ancient vampires, because the character walks into the room, he bumps into all these like vampires in a circle, but they're all sleeping. And he's like, why are they looking at me? He's like, they're not looking at you, they're sleeping. And he says, they're the ancients. When he said the ancients, I was like, oh my god, the ancient ones, the watchers, sleeping, Tartarus, Hollow Earth, you know. And basically, he was now enlisted as a human soldier for them. And the way they looked when they were sleeping, it reminded me slightly of the lizard statues, the ancient lizard men statues that are all over the world that they can't explain, historians can't explain. Yet, to me, it sounds just like there was some kind of reptilian stuff going on a long time ago. And the other thing about Ebola, with its connection to strain, is that the strain on TV is that they always describe Ebola as looking like a worm-like virus under a microscope. You always see it. And of course, on the strain, people didn't get infected by their blood getting sucked. No, it's not your typical vampire thing. It's by the little worms that got into their skin. That's what infected and turned them. Also, with the whole ZMapp drug that they used to cure 2 of the Americans that came here, they used, I believe the first guy they cured's blood, and then it was able to cure other people, but they say they're out of it now, so they're not able to give it to Eric Duncan or any of the people in West Africa. There's not enough, and they don't know if it works on everybody. The interesting thing is, it just sounds just like a few movies. You think about World War Z, when Brad Pitt, he infects himself and then he cures himself and he uses his blood and then he's able to save everyone. Or you think of the movie I Am Legend with Will Smith, and the same thing happens. They're using someone else's blood to cure other people. Also, I've heard that as far as coming with vaccines, that maybe they're going to use a modified strain of the rabies virus to cure Ebola, which sounds like an awesome idea, right? And you know how deadly rabies is. And of course, people are pointing out how on 28 days later, how they did the opposite. They used Ebola, a strain of Ebola, to try to cure rage. And instead, you know, the rabies took over and they ended up becoming zombie-like people, so that doesn't sound too good for the future. And then I thought about how 28 days later, and then you look at the movie Outbreak, which had an Ebola-like virus, and they made it where it was discovered in the year, I think they flipped it to 1967 in the African jungle. I'm just reading the plot from Wikipedia real quick. Matoba, fictional virus which causes a deadly fever, is discovered in the African jungles in 1967. To keep the secret of the virus, 2 U.S. Army officers, Donald McClintock and William Ford, destroy the camp where it was found. 28 years later, in 1995, the virus resurfaces in Zaire. So here we go. Once again, you see the 28 days later, 28 years later on this movie. The guy was taken into isolation here in America on the 28th day of September. I would know that because that was my birthday. But the point I'm making is, you see these 28s. I'm not saying that there's this, I'm not saying that the number 28 is like a new thing to look out for, but I find it interesting that in that movie they did that. And of course, they do the common theme on all of these movies where you see on Contagion or you see on The Strain that it's transmitted through flying, and then it causes everybody to start getting sick. So that's another thing to keep in mind when examining the outbreak of these diseases. Moving on to the beheading, there's not a lot to say that has already been said about these beheadings, but one thing I did notice, at least the version I watched of the beheading, was it was 1 minute 11 seconds long, and there was the 111, which to me is very telling. And then, like, all of them, once again, they're always cutting the scene where his neck is getting chopped off by a tiny little knife, and then you see this head on the back of, laying on the back of his back, and blood all over the place, and it looks fake to me. As far as the security breaches go, with the Secret Service and everything, it seemed really suspicious that they would keep failing and failing. I'm pretty sure that either they're not telling the whole side of the story, which means that they weren't really breaches. Whatever the case may be, I feel as if it's another form of programming, getting people prepared for something to come. What it is, like I said, once again, I have no idea, but there's too much, even in the media, too much fear going on, and there's a lot coming. And another thing about the Ebola, because I was looking up some stuff from what I said earlier, I guess they're going to give the Dunkin' guys some of the experimental drug now, and yeah, I guess they're now going to start cracking down in the airport about monitoring people. So that's new news as well. Also, the last thing I want to say is that there's another blood moon coming up. And a lot of people said that when you look at the first one, a lot of stuff happened. I don't know exactly. There's ISIS, there's Ebola, there's all this concern with Enterovirus and everything else you can name. And a lot of people are saying that when the second one hits, there's going to be more that escalates. Some people are saying it's no big deal, it's just a blood moon. It is interesting, they do fall on the holidays, the Jewish holidays. This one falls on the Feast of Tabernacles, so that's another interesting thing to add to everything going on. Like I always say in every video when I comment on what's going on in the world, I really don't know. All I can say is you can examine things, you can see the inconsistencies within the stories that they're telling us on TV and what's really going on, and then you can see that there are some things that you can't explain, like blood moons occurring on certain days, and whether or not it means something, I think it means something. I'm not sure what it means, but it's just something we'll have to keep our eyes out for, pray, and I wouldn't go crazy over this Ebola thing. I mean, I would use caution. They say to wash your hands, blah, blah, blah. I don't think that something as deadly as that washing your hands is going to be the greatest help. But mainly just, I guess, praying and just not getting caught up in the hysteria that they're causing. Because eventually this hysteria is going to lead to people getting a vaccine. And that vaccine could be the real outbreak to be concerned about. So that's really my commentary on what's going on in the world today. I didn't have a lot to say, but that's pretty much what I noticed. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll talk to you next week. Goodbye, and God bless.